A few days ago, I hope you celebrated because our country celebrated a Trans Day of Visibility, is what it's called. The Trans Day of Visibility. This was supposed to be a time to focus on trans people, celebrate trans people, talk about the bravery and beauty of trans people. In other words, it was a day just like every other day. Our experience with the Trans Day of Visibility is like Bill Murray's experience with Groundhog's Day. It repeats forever, nothing changes, it never ends. Indeed, there's never been a group as fractionally tiny as the trans population and yet so visible. There's never been a community so small and yet so accommodated by society. For the sake of trans people, we've changed the English language, thrown out the rules of grammar, passed laws, effectively abolished women's sports, tossed biological science into the wood chipper. Come to think of it, there has never been a population of any size, majority or minority, that's been given those sorts of considerations. Most of all, we've never seen such a concerted and effective effort to purposefully increase the size of a particular population. There are 10 times as many trans-identifying people in Generation Z as there are in older generations, and that figure is no accident. It's also not the organic result of people simply feeling more free to live in their authentic identities, live their truths, now that society is allegedly more open and tolerant than it was in the past. No, this is rather the result of programming. Children are initiated into the left's gender theory religion, and one Twitter thread meant to commemorate our Trans Day of Visibility perfectly demonstrates how this works. So it's worth looking at. The thread from a podcaster named Jesse Thorne has been liked and retweeted thousands of times by leftists who insist that it's heartfelt, beautiful, of course, stunning. In it, Jesse explains how he and his wife, who hosts her own podcast, by the way, appropriately titled One Bad Mother. Those are her words. That's her podcast title, not mine. But he explains how they first discovered that their son was a girl. The left tells us that this is a perfect explanation of the trans phenomenon among kids. And I completely agree, actually. So here's the story as he tells it, okay? He says, quote, "I'm the parent of a trans kid. I want to clarify what that means as best I can, because a lot of folks don't know or make incorrect presumptions. Happy #Trans Day of Visibility. My daughter is 9. When she was born, we assumed she was a boy, gave her a boy name, called her he. We gave her all kinds of toys. She generally preferred the ones our culture associates with boys, like building toys, trucks, and robots. She hated getting haircuts and always wanted her hair long, like my wife's. But we just figured kids hate haircuts. She loved the Jungle Book, especially the part where Baloo, the bear, dresses up in a hula skirt. But what kid doesn't love that? When she started kindergarten, my wife was bathing her. Hopefully it's not the first time the child was bathed, but we'll get past that. An adult friend of ours had just come out as trans, and my wife mentioned that not all girls have vaginas and not all boys have penises. Our daughter asked, some girls have penises? My wife said yes. Whether you're a boy or a girl wasn't about your private parts. I'm a girl with a penis, my daughter said. All of a sudden, all these things that had confused us about her when she was younger made sense. We went to learn about gender and kids. I mean, I'm from San Francisco, grew up with a trans neighbor. My wife went to Sarah Lawrence. We were open, but pretty ignorant. Well, on that last point, I must agree. As for the rest, I still am not ready to accept that so many people can read all of that, what I just read to you, and come away thinking, yes, well, clearly that child was really a girl all along. This proves it. It is possible that half of the country has literally gone insane, but I think it's more likely that lots of people pretend for political and social reasons to accept and agree with what they know is irrational and indefensible. And that's one of the things that makes this subject so frustrating, is that when you're arguing with people, it's a very good chance that the person you're arguing with knows that you're right, but won't admit it. Let's review the process by which Jesse and his wife Teresa came to the conclusion that their little boy had a little girl trapped inside him. He said, and this is the story that he tells. It's not me being reductive or anything like that. This is his story. He says that his son enjoyed playing with trucks and robots. So far, so normal. He also hated getting his hair cut. In my experience with my two sons, this is also quite normal. I've never known a young boy who likes getting his haircut. I didn't like getting a haircut when I was a young boy. I don't think any boys like getting their haircuts. The boy enjoyed the film The Jungle Book. Again, my own sons can relate. I liked The Jungle Book too when I was a kid. But he was especially fascinated with the scene where Baloo the bear wears a hula skirt and dances around. Well, what child isn't fascinated with a dancing bear in a hula skirt? Now, even if it were possible for a male child to, in some sense, be a girl, which it's not, how could any of this be sufficient evidence to support that conclusion? This doesn't pass the smell test even if we accept the fantastically delusional premise that boys can theoretically be girls and vice versa. In no universe, this universe or the fantasy land that the left pretends we inhabit, is this boy's behavior indicative of anything other than a normal boy who has normal boy-like interests. Yes, the boy said that he's a girl with a penis, but he only said that after his mother told him that some girls have penises. If you tell a 5-year-old boy that some dragons are 3.5 feet tall and look a lot like 5-year-old boys, he's almost certain to inform you that he is just such a dragon. What a coincidence. Kids are highly suggestible. They have underdeveloped brains. They have an underdeveloped sense of the world and reality. They can't distinguish between fact and fiction. A child at 5 can't be meaningfully accused of telling a lie because he doesn't fully understand the difference between a lie and the truth. Recently I came into the kitchen and I found a broken glass on the floor. And I asked my 4-year-old, who was closest by, if he broke it. And over the course of the brief interrogation, he told me that he did break it, that he didn't break it, that it was already broken, that his brother broke it, and that the dog broke it. We don't have a dog. He doesn't have enough of a grasp on reality to deceive me effectively because he's just a small child. And everything that he says, every claim that he makes, should be understood in that context. Jesse doesn't have a grasp on this basic fact of child psychology or has chosen to ignore it. Now, he goes on through the lengthy thread to describe how his son socially transitioned, quote unquote, in kindergarten. Now, at the age of 9, Jesse is thinking about what sorts of drugs he wants to put the child on. He also goes into detail about the Herculean efforts needed to protect his boy's parentally imposed delusions. This is what he writes. We still had to and have to be on guard at all times. Every new care situation, camp, sports, babysitter, friends, parents, had to get a briefing. We had to check every room for jerks because being misgendered or forced to explain yourself is traumatic for a young child. We basically had to be the professional trainers for every set of grown-ups that entered our kids' lives. It was and remains exhausting. I can only imagine what it's like for adult trans and gender non-conforming people. Now, Jesse doesn't stop to consider why an allegedly authentic identity should require so much work to preserve. If his son is a girl, why does every adult in his vicinity need to be prepped on the proper ways to address him and act around him? My daughter, real daughter, actual girl, doesn't need me to give a speech to every person she comes across. I don't need to explain to anyone that she's a girl. I don't need to make any effort at all to maintain her in her girl identity. That's because there's a difference between my daughter and his. The difference is that my daughter is a daughter. The rest of the thread is as disturbing and diluted as what we've already reviewed. But there was one brief moment of clarity, lucidity. Jesse wrote, quote, anyway, she told us her new name, Grace. Actually, she initially said Grease, but we figured out what she meant. Not the clearest enunciator back then. Ah, yes. You figured out what, quote, she meant. That is indeed the job of a child, of a parent, I should say. Children say many things and often don't know what the words that they're using actually mean. They make claims that aren't true and that they don't know aren't true. They express desires that are not really their desires. They say things all the time that begin with, I want, and a parent has to say, no, you don't really want that. You think you do, but you don't. It's your job as a parent to use your maturity and wisdom to guide your child, lead them, not be led by them. Jesse heard his, quote, daughter say that, quote, she wanted to be called Grease. Well, Jesse knew that Grease is a ridiculous name. Surely he can't actually want that name. And even if he does, it's for his own good that you guide him to a different name. Because he doesn't understand the significance of a name. You can't look ahead into the future and consider what it will be like to actually live with that name. That's why we give our kids their name. And even parents who let their children choose their names still don't really let them choose them. I mean, you'll notice that you very rarely hear about a trans child who chooses their own name and is now referred to as Dragon Ninja or Giant Pirate or something like that. I think it's odd, isn't it? all these young kids who choose their own names, quote unquote, they always end up with trendy sounding names. They never end up with the kind of name that you would expect a 5-year-old to choose. Well, that's because even the parents who let kids choose their own name won't really let their children choose any name they want, because we can't let them do that because they don't understand what it means to have a name. But if you won't let the child choose any name they want, why would you let your children choose whatever gender they want? Why don't they, as Jesse said, try to figure out what a boy really means when he says he's a girl with a penis? Why don't these parents apply their superior wisdom and maturity to that situation and offer their children some much-needed guidance? Well, because they see their children as political statements and fashion accessories. That's the truth. They don't see their kids as kids. They don't see their kids as human beings. Jesse was quite excited to talk about his trans daughter on his podcast, but he can't very well brag about a kid named Grease. No, he needs his son to be a girl named Grace. That's much more palatable to him. Jesse, that is. More useful to him. And this is all really about him, isn't it? Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.